Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. So, as you're listening to this, I want to wish you a happy Memorial Day. As they say, the kickoff of summer is Memorial Day, and so really excited for today's episode as we're going to bring on a guest. And as I was thinking about this episode coming out right around Memorial Day, I wanted to do something kind of a little bit different, a little bit unique in that I'm always very appreciative of those that have served, those that have sacrificed for our country and given so much. And so yeah, I could sit here and I could talk about what sacrifice really is. But to be honest, folks, I'm a civilian. I've never served. I don't have any of that background, that firsthand experience, that perspective. Yeah, I'm like most where maybe a grandparent served. Both of my grandparents served in the Korean War. And so I've got a little bit of knowledge there, but not very much. And so that's where I was really excited to bring on this guest, a good friend of mine. We go back a little ways. And so I'm excited to bring on, without further ado, Tyler Sharp. So Tyler, go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll just kind of go from there.
Hey, like Garrett said, I'm Tyler Sharp. I've known Garrett for, it seems like forever, to be honest. I've known your family for a long time. But no, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, it seems like it's a long time. In retrospect, I suppose it kind of is. It's probably half a decade, 5-6 years, something like that, since we met each other. So I guess we kind of both joined a group, kind of a mutual group there called Legacy Farmer. If you guys have probably heard of it. So we were both at the same time. I think we even joined around the same time. So kind of had similar experiences there. So just really got to know each other, been around each other in person at multiple live events. And so really got to be good friends. And so I guess, Tyler, explain a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and then we'll just kind of get into your background as far as the service side of things.
Born and raised in Healy, Kansas. Just recently moved over to Scott City, so a whole 28 miles away. But yeah, a little bit of my life story. Like I said, born and raised Southwest Kansas. Grew up working for my father at the family seed business, and kind of always had dreams and aspirations of going into the military, going to the service. A lot of father and sons worked on vehicles or engines growing up. Dad owned a garage, and I changed my own oil and a tire, and that's about it. So if your engine goes down, I'm not the guy to call. But Dad and I did a lot of shooting. We built our own guns and we tweaked things. We worked on things and we went out and shoot prairie dogs, coyotes, deer, whatever. And so that's how Dad and I bonded a lot growing up. So kind of seeing where I'm at today, that makes a lot of sense. So had a normal childhood and worked for Dad, worked on the farm. My senior year in high school, Dad had a massive heart attack and ended up blowing out his widowmaker vein while we were out deer hunting. And I had to carry him back to the pickup. And he shouldn't have lived by any stretch of the word. He shouldn't have lived, but he did. And that kind of changed my course of life. I thought, upon graduation, I was going to go into the military, give my service there. And seeing Dad land on the hospital table, the guy in charge of a multi-million-dollar family seed company and farm, that's kind of where my focus needed to be from there. So put those plans on hold, went to college. I enjoyed college way too much. Went in for the 4-year program, came out with the 5-year program as a general studies with a psychology, sociology, and a criminal justice major. So I had a lot of fun there. But I thought that was what I was going to do the rest of my life. Right at the time of graduation, I did some competitive long-range shooting, and I ended up winning a match on a military base and didn't think anything of it. Put the trophy in the closet. Next day, I was sitting on my apartment couch, drinking a beer, and I got a call. Mind you, this was like 2010, before the days of caller ID were really, really what they are today. And it was just 4 dashes on the phone. And so I got a call on my phone. It was just those 4 dashes. I thought, this is weird. So I answered the phone. I was like, hello? And he's like, is this Tyler Sharp? So this is kind of where it gets a little colorful. I was like, I don't know. You tell me, a-hole, you called me. And he goes, well, this is General so-and-so with the United States Army. And I saw you shoot like in my couch. I like straightened up, put my beer down. I'm like, oh, hello, sir. How can I help you? And he goes, I saw you shooting at the match yesterday and I was impressed. I'm like, well, thank you. Why are you calling me? I'm a college kid that's probably a little too mouthy. And he goes, well, have you ever thought about going overseas? And I was like, oh, you don't want me, blah, 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 blah. Here's my reasoning why. And he goes, well, we don't, but we know a company that might. Have you heard of DynCorp? And I actually had not heard of DynCorp. And this is right after the whole Blackwater fiasco, which made the headlines over some pretty negative circumstances, another private security company. And I was like, no, I haven't. And he goes, well, look into it and give me a call back in 24 hours. Okay. So I kind of looked into DynCorp. I liked they were international, huge company, security contracting, and kind of liked what they stood for. They had, at least on paper and on their websites and publicly obtainable documents, they had like high morals, high values, and that's kind of still fell in line with who I was. So gave him a call, and a few days later, I was on a plane down to Georgia to prove that I could shoot the way I said I could, and I had to take some defensive driving courses and stuff like that. And then literally a few days after that, I was on a plane to Afghanistan. So within, a week's time, give or take, I was sitting on a couch drinking beer. And now I'm in at the time, I got sent to Kandahar, Afghanistan. At the time, that was one of the most violent and dangerous places on the planet. And that's exactly where I wanted to be. So it's kind of cool. At that time, I'd have been, 23, I think? 22, 23? Huh. I'll have to do the math. I'm getting old now. Actually, the day this podcast airs will be my 39th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, it was it was a very sombering experience as a early 20-something writing a Dear Mom and Dad letter because I didn't tell them I left. So I went overseas without basically their approval, their knowledge, because I knew exactly what they would say. And so I honestly wrote this Dear Mom and Dad letter, left it with the office back stateside, with little intention of making it back, to be flat out honest. That was just how rough Kandahar was at the time. We had IEDs all the time. We had vehicle-borne IEDs, VBIDs. It was just a very dangerous place to be. But I was confident in my skills. I got to meet my team. So I had a spotter with me, and then I had a 2-man security element that was assigned to me. And it was just a very, very, very cool experience that I hope my son makes much smarter decisions in life and does not do, to be honest. But we got thrown in some pretty nasty, pretty ugly situations, but it was exactly where I felt like I was meant to be. There were several things that came from that, though. I grew up going to church. I honestly fell out of my religion due to my time overseas. How could God make me shoot women and children? How could He truly make me do, or use me as the vessel, I guess now, but use me to inflict that kind of harm, hate, and damage? And I really, really struggled with that. And, jumping forward here a little bit, when I came back home, I definitely fell into alcohol hard. I was a fully functioning alcoholic. It would be no question to me if I put down 20 to 30 beers a day, then hopped on my motorcycle, went to the bar, closed it down at 2:00, drove my motorcycle back home, woke up at 6:00 and did it all over again. So that was probably the lowest point in my life. And I literally had no intentions on seeing the age of 30. Like, that was just, why bother? I had demons in my ear every single day when I came home, and I tried to drown them, but those suckers could swim really, really, really well. But put all that, met a really good woman, my wife, and she definitely pulled me out of the bottle. She said, this is not who I'm going to marry. This is not what I'm going to put up with. And got my crap straightened out for sure. But that's the whole fast forward picture. But, overseas, that was an interesting time to be in the private security world. Our rules of engagement were way more laxed than the military. We could shoot based upon intent, and literally a large knife or a rifle in your vicinity was enough for me to assume ill intent. So they actually embedded our team, with a lot of the mostly Marine elements. We worked with a whole lot of different really cool people. Some people that obviously their names will never be revealed. What they did will never be revealed, but some really, really cool people. But we worked with a lot of Marines because back at that time, they were still going door to door. We were still trying to get guns out of the streets, get the bomb makers off the streets. And so they would send us along to kind of stir up the hornet's nest. They couldn't shoot unless they were shot at first. And by then, the enemy had time to establish their best attempt as an ambush or just kind of get some other proactive measures in place that were definitely detrimental to the men and women in uniform. So they sent me along on my team, and we would often be, at times, we were well over a mile ahead of the armored element. So we were kind of definitely out there on our own, set up in our hide, and we would try to essentially piss off the enemy and get them to start shooting at us first before they had a chance to surprise our men and women. And that's where I felt like I was making a big difference, because it really didn't matter what I had to do. I was going to do it to make sure that me and my team went home, but also as many men and women behind me went home as well. So that was kind of why they sent us along. We got paid by contracts. I was guaranteed a per diem every day just for being in country. So I was paid very, very well just for literally having my boots in that crappy, dirty, hot dust, and then whatever contracts that we wanted to pick up. Now, mind you, in the scope of this huge, big international organization, I was pretty low man on that totem pole, but we were still paid absolutely insanely well. We were paid so well, in fact, and they didn't have a high expectation of us making it home. We weren't offered life insurance policies or anything like that. But at the time, I didn't have a wife, kid, dog, and a house to come back home to. So I was just going to be out there living my best life, doing the best that I could, and hoping that I made a difference before my ticket was punched. We would do all sorts of different contracts. From my very first contract I picked up, I had to guard a poppy field. I don't know if you're familiar with what poppy is, but we had to guard a poppy field. And the people that were working were locals, and we had to protect those locals from the Taliban or who else might be trying to cause them harm. So it was a very eye-opening experience, because when they were in that field, they were issued a specific colored armband to wear. And if they had that armband on, they were friendlies, I had to protect them. Then next day or 2 days later or a week later, you'd recognize a face, and that same face was shooting back at you. So that was a very eye-opening experience. I found out after the fact when I came home that poppy field was owned by the U.S. government. But why does the U.S. government need a drug field under their command? I was paid not to ask questions. So that was kind of eye-opening. We did long-range overwatch. We did close diamond executive protection. One of the coolest contracts I picked up was we guarded one of the princes of Saudi Arabia. Tell me why a Saudi prince needs heavily armed security with his own security meeting with warlords. Again, I was paid not to ask. So I was paid to protect him and do my job, and we did it well. So those are just wild. Then we'd have the not so fun and glorious ones where you would have maybe some engineers trying to set up a school or a power plant for the local villages, and it would get attacked. We would have to go in then and do the hazmat cleanup. We'd be putting people in bags, trying to get them out. It was easier when it was locals. There's not a face, there's not a name, there's nothing. It was hard when it was U.S. soldiers. Those were the hard ones. But we were there to help, and so that's what we were doing.
Yeah, for sure. No, I guess it could dive into a lot there, but I want to go back to, kind of your history where you started out. Dad has a heart attack, all of a sudden course change, change in plans. And then, sit here 5 years later after college and after you graduated thinking that your plan was now this, then all of a sudden you get this phone call. Did you see that as like almost an escape? Like, yes, I'm getting an opportunity to go overseas. Like, hey, this is something that I've always wanted to do. Did that take you much to jump on it, or what was your thought process making that decision?
Well, it was easier, like I said, a whole different time in my life. It was so much easier then because I had no one at home depending on me. I had a mortgage, a truck payment. That was my only things at home depending on me. So absolutely, that was something I definitely wanted to jump on. By this point in time, I had already gone through the EMT courses. So I had that kind of knowledge. I was already a fire captain at the time. So I already liked that public service. And that's something I still carry forward to this day. Actually, I think last year, I retired from the fire department after 22 years. And I'm no longer in EMS at all. So I was kind of taking a different phase of life then versus now, and focusing now more on my family and my son, now my dog. But to answer your question, I don't think I accepted on the phone, the initial phone call, because I had known that private security had, security contractors, mercenaries is the negative term that goes along with them. They'd had such a negative rap in the news as of late. I didn't want to be wrapped up with a company that I couldn't find myself aligning with.
Sure. Sure.
So, I never jumped on the fact of like, oh, hey, I can't wait to go put holes in somebody. That wasn't what it was. I definitely wanted, with my skill set, to do what I could to make sure that other men and women could make it home. And I'm not like putting myself on a pedestal. I just knew that I had options and I had fewer restrictions that would allow me to make that possible.
Yeah, right, and make a difference, kind of like you mentioned before. And then my next question after that was, it sounds like, like I said, I can't remember the exact time frame, but within a few days, like, or within a short amount of time, all of a sudden you're overseas in a different country, just right in it, and so basically deployed, right? And so I'm just trying to understand really what was your mindset like? Do you think you're even prepared to what you're about to see because you didn't even go through any sort of, I guess I want to say, long form training? Or what was that like kind of you for you just kind of getting thrown into it right away?
Yeah. So I had life skills that I knew would be beneficial, but was I ripped and at the best shape of my life? Okay, looking back now, I was probably at the best shape of my life back then. But was I, in just phenomenal warfighting shape? No. I didn't have basic boot camp. I didn't have months and months and months of running and weights. I did cross country in high school, but by that point in time, that was also like, that was over 10 years. So that was still a long time ago. I knew that my life skills that I had would carry me, and I am too damn stubborn to quit anything. So I knew that if, as they say, if shit hit the fan, that I was not going to be one of those guys that quit and then became a liability. That never even crossed my mind. But things I didn't account for, and I probably should have done a little more research into, the heat. Holy cow. We would see 110, 115 daily. I think we got spiked to like 120, 122 one day. It was hot. Living in Southwest Kansas, I was used to the heat and wind and dirt blowing, but that was a whole different ballgame. Then the other thing that I didn't really take into account was, at nighttime, by layman's terms, I was a sniper. I was precision overwatch was my official title. And you always want to take the high ground, right? You never want to find yourself lower than the highest point, whether that be a building, a hill, a tree, whatever. So in the evenings, we would hike up a mountain. And so that may have just gained us 10, 15,000, 20,000 feet in elevation. Well, nighttime in Kandahar, Afghanistan drops down to like near zero. So you sweat your butt off getting up that hill, doing your best to remove layers to not sweat, but it was, I'm a hairy dude. I'm going to sweat regardless. And so, seeing 0 degrees, then spiking up to 110, 115 in the course of 12 hours, that was wild. I was not prepared for that.
Sure. No, I can't imagine how we even prepare for that temperature swing alone. So I guess in total, how many days or how long were you kind of overseas or deployed like that?
So I did a lot of things in that short time I was there, but I was over for right about a month. We picked up contracts, sometimes 2 and 3 contracts a day. There'd be times we didn't sleep for 48, 72 hours just because we just kept picking up contracts. Like I said, we were pretty low on the totem pole. So if they'd said, hey, we really need your team to take this one, all right, this is what you do. I said, I honestly didn't plan on coming home. But on my last day in country, the one that sent me home, the story that I didn't tell for a lot of years, a lot of years, that I struggle a lot with it. I wouldn't argue the fact that I still have some PTSD issues just due to the extreme violence, the extreme adrenaline, things that our men and women go through for years that I went through just very briefly. But it's a whole lot different too when literally 98% of the lives that I took and we were highly effective at our job. I observed that person up close. I observed them through my scope. Still to this day, I could probably draw you most of the faces of the lives that I took. You got to really see their personalities before that trigger was pulled. I struggled with that for a long time. Ultimately, talking about it, more or less maybe opening up to my wife was one of the biggest things that helped. Because I'm still of that that generation, which the mold needs to break. But I'm of that generation. I don't need to talk to a shrink. They're not going to be any help, you know? So therefore, I just bottled it up and tried to drink it away. Didn't help. But my last day in country, mine and my spotters, we were doing an overwatch for the Marines, doing door to doors. And again, this is that time I referenced earlier. We were about a mile ahead of them on the rooftop, and we could see some commotion going 500-600 meters away from our position, away from the military element. But we could see that there was getting to be a lot of technicals, a lot of vehicles with soldiers and machine guns mounted on them. So my spotter, Mikey, and I, we made the decision that we were going to start engaging because there was going to be quite a few enemy forces built up at this time. And we wanted to try to catch them off guard. They thought they were out of range and safe before they got to sneak up on our troops. So we started engaging, and the firefight was going. We were engaging targets on a rooftop. I was shooting a Barrett MRAD 338 Lapua. It was the largest bullet that the Geneva Convention allowed on soft targets. And I hated math. I failed it miserably until I learned how to weaponize it. And once I learned my ballistics and learned how to calculate that kind of math, then I really liked math. But I really liked that round. And then my spotter had a Barrett 50 cal. And that one wasn't allowed on soft targets, but he was using that to either blow holes through buildings or disable vehicles. And we were engaging targets. Then every day, every mission with us, I had 2 machine gun security elements, and they were on the ground floor kind of guarding our backs for us. So we started engaging targets. Must have been, felt like a lifetime, but it must have been no more than 5 to 6 minutes into the engagement. We started, obviously, they pinpointed back on us because we were not in a good spot where we could shoot and move, shoot and move, shoot and move. We were kind of dedicated to that spot. Plus, I knew a mile behind me, I had armored vehicles with fully automatic 50s, and they had grenade machine guns. So we knew that we had some help that would be there in just a few minutes. But that few minutes, it took a while. It took a while. So engaging targets. I caught a puff of dust right in front of me, and then my shoulder just exploded. It hurt like a pain that I've never felt before. And approximately 7 to 8 seconds after that, 2 RPGs hit our building from 2 different directions. And Mikey and I ended up crumbling 2 stories down to the ground. So once the dust settled, we're still getting shot at. I tried to find Mikey, found him right next to me. He ended up breaking a collarbone, all of his ribs on one side, his pelvis and his femur, all on one side. So he was in bad way. I looked down and I could see the bones in my shoulder just from an open bullet hole. And I knew it wasn't looking good. But also I knew that we had built such a good rapport with the Marine element behind us that they'd be coming to pick our butts up real quick. So my rifle got busted. Mikey, in the course of the explosion, I don't know why, thank God, I guess he did. He hugged his 50 cal, and that survived the fall with us. So we were dragging him. So the security guys, we were testers for a lot of medical products that weren't yet approved for mainstream use. And I don't remember what they're called today. The design has changed dramatically, but it was a giant plastic applicator filled with essentially like cotton balls. And so now they have like powders that'll do this. But I shoved it in my shoulder, plunged it, and then it like expands and like just tries to clot it off. And so I was shoving that in my shoulder all the while. I thought it was so dumb that when I was in Georgia, I had to prove and qualify that I could shoot offhand with my non-dominant hand, my left hand. I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. Well, that was my saving grace. So I had to switch my pistol with that hand, dragging Mikey, dragging his 50, and I'm still shooting at enemies behind us with my offhand, trying to get back to that Marine element. So they saw that we were in danger. Of course, they saw the explosions, and then all hell broke loose. And so they sent up a couple of APC armored personnel carriers with 50s on top to come pick us up and get us back home. And so thank God for those guys, because that's another reason I made it home for sure. So that was my last day in country. As a private security guy at that time, there were 50, 60 guys waiting for your spot. So if you couldn't immediately return to combat effectiveness, combat readiness, there were people that were ready to take your job. And we were paid very, very, very well. So I ended up having to get flown home. I got my shoulder repaired while I was rehabbing. Well, Mikey lived in Alabama, so he went home there. He was rehabbing. I was in Kansas. And That's when I fell into the bottle pretty hard. In a lack of judgment, I decided to go ahead and renew my tickets. I was like, I'm going to get back overseas. I'm going to get back in the fight. My shoulder works. I can, that's like a 12-hour plane ride. I could detox on the plane. I'll be fine. Again, not a great decision. There's one that was made. I'm not afraid to admit my poor decisions because they also have shaped me to where I am now. But I ended up meeting my wife, and I decided a future with her was going to be worth more than some money in my bank account. And then again, probably not even making it home to spend it. So Mikey ended up taking my tickets. He became the team lead, and his first week in country, they went over an IED and Mikey did make it home. So he was in my seat, and that should have been me that died. Again, then you can imagine I spiraled again after that, but I had a support system by then to help work through it. In the precision, in the sniper world, when you die with your rifle, they decommission it. Like it's got bad juju, whatever, like people aren't going to shoot it anymore. The DynCorp offered it to Mikey's family. They didn't want it. So Mikey's family offered it to me. And I said, absolutely. I'll take that gun all day long. I shot that gun in country. It actually still has a little bit of Mikey's blood on it when it arrived to me. And so I put a new optic on it, changed the springs, put some shellac over the blood. So it's just preserved on the gun. And it hangs on the wall in my gun store. So it's kind of a cool memory of some very poor decisions I made, but some of the greatest times in my life. And that was kind of my experience there. They've tried to reactivate me a few times. DynCorp, again, like I said, is an international company. They decided they were going to get involved in the Ferguson riots, guarding some buildings or guarding some executives or whatever. Turned that one down. I did not want to be essentially a civilian, didn't necessarily have to act within the law, but was still governed by the law. So I was like, absolutely, I'm not going to do that on U.S. soil. So I turned that one down. And then again, they reached out to me again during Ukraine when that all kicked off. And I turned that one down again because, by now I've got a wife and kids. And at almost 39 years old, I'm an old man in that world. That explosion, obviously messed up my shoulder. I got to put back together. It still grinds all the time, but it also damaged my L1 and L2 vertebrae on my back. And they want to fuse those together, and I'm holding off on that as long as possible. So rolling out of bed takes me a try or two in the morning. But I kind of hung up my gun and decided I would try to help in other ways. And that's, why I stuck with the fire department and the EMS for so long. And I felt like I had done a lot of bad things to they were bad people. I think I had this talk with my son. He goes, well, Dad, did you hate them? I was like, no, I didn't hate them. They were trying to defend their country against us as the invaders. We were trying to defend the locals versus the bad guys. So no, I don't hate them, but I had to do a lot of bad things to a lot of bad people. And so I felt like I have to spend the rest of my life trying to atone for that. That's strictly in my head. 100% it's in my head. And so that's where I got even more involved in the fire department, trying to help train the young guys. If I can help, as the captain, I was in charge of training. So I was wanting to try to do my best to make those little 18-year-old boys and girls, essentially, men and women, but I'm old, so they were boys and girls, trying to help them be as safe on the job as they could be. The EMS giving back to those in our community on the worst day of their life. And now I ran for city council, didn't make it, but I'm on a couple of the city committees and stuff like that. I'm on the board for our local Western Kansas Child Advocacy Center. So we work with law enforcement that kids that get sexually abused, gets them out of the home, gets them the therapy they need to try to put their pieces back together. So that's what I do now. And of course, my gun store. I love my gun store, but that's kind of my life in a nutshell. Not the trajectory I thought I would take.
Well, I'm sure that's to some extent all of us. You're just a little bit probably more intense, really. So the time that you were over in country, you said about a month. Were you planning on coming home at that time, or was it because of the accident or because of the incident? I guess whatever you want to call it.
No, I was going to go out in a blazing glory. I didn't plan on coming home as team lead. So with the way they worked there, you were supposed to be. They differed a little bit. Either 1 week on, 2 weeks off, or 2 weeks on, 1 week off, because they wanted you to have that R&R because we're just jacked up on nicotine, caffeine, and adrenaline, and a lack of sleep for a week, maybe not even 2 weeks. And they they definitely wanted you. That's not good for longevity either. But as team lead, I had the option to just keep going steady, and that's what I was just going to do. I was going to do as much good in as long a time as I could.
Sure. I just wasn't sure, like from the private side of things, if a 1 month like deployment was kind of standard or how that worked, or if it was just a little bit different there.
So DynCorp doesn't exist anymore. They got sold out, which is not uncommon. The security companies building something up, getting it to a sellable stage, and then making a nice, very healthy exit. At that time, we would sign up for, I believe it was 6 months contracts. So 6 month contract, like you're on for that week, off for the two, or on for the two, off for the one. And that 1 week that you were off, it was what's wild is, in that private side, money had no value, like to them. Literally, the TV stand was a pallet of cash. We would, every day before we left the compound, because we weren't on the military base, we had our own compound because we weren't military, we'd shove $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in our pockets. So, we'd go out, and if we didn't want to go over a gate and we breached the gate and we went through it, oh, sorry, here's $5,000 for your gate, I'm sorry. Or a dog attacked us, we put the dog down, oh, here's $1,000 for your dog, I'm sorry, have a great day. So, like, essentially, we paid people off to make them not turn us into the enemies, essentially. But, and every day when we left the compound, we would carry 2 to 4 of the AT-4 rockets. So these were shoulder-mounted rockets that were just big enough that they were mobile, that they would take out light armor. And did we ever encounter armor? I can't think of a single time I ran into enemy armor. But we would use those to breach the big compound walls. Maybe they had a steel fortified door, so we would send a rocket through the door. We used dozens and dozens and dozens of those. When I got home, I found out, this is 2010, those are $100,000 a piece. I had no clue. I didn't get yelled at for it, so we just kept doing it. It was just wild that money has no relevance to someone. So I can't imagine what kind of dollar they were turning on contracts. I know what I was getting paid, but it was just wild.
Sure. No, that's crazy. So I guess the one question that come to mind for me, and I don't know if this is really even easy to answer, but being you're on the private security side, not necessarily an enlisted force, right? Do you feel like in those decisions you had to make, and ultimately, taking people's lives and those tough decisions that maybe still haunt you, do you feel like, one, you had the support that you needed once you got home, but then two, like, do you feel like it would have been harder or easier to some extent? Easier is probably not even the right word, but if it would have been through an enlisted force?
A couple different angles to take on that. When I came home, did I have the proper support? Absolutely not. After they paid for my surgery on my shoulder, like, I was I didn't get a severance package, nothing. Like, you're just in home, you're done. Like, so they didn't even offer us life insurance policies. So, like, you were just done. I did have to talk with a DynCorp psychologist on my exit interview. And when she was trying to get, like, so after every life that I took, I had to do an after action report detailing what happened, why did I make that decision, what was the outcome, and then they had to get a couple eyewitness statements. And of course, the eyewitness statements are always your teammates. So tell me the legitimacy there. So no, I don't feel like I had this support coming home. And living in rural Southwest Kansas, was there a plethora of psychologists around? No. Well, also, would I have taken one up if they knocked on my door? Also no. But you and I aren't that far apart in age. There's still that, you're a man, tough it up, suck it up, deal with it, push it down. So that didn't help anything either. And you take it to another side of things. If you're changing hats and it was an enlisted, they would have to go through, and my job wasn't enlisted, I just have a lot of friends that are, they'd have to go through numerous evaluations with military psychologists. So would they have more support? There would probably be more red tape, more crap they had to jump through. But as far as the true support, I feel like it would be about the same. Like, again, you're in that bravado, big old macho environment. You're not going to be weak and go see a psychologist. Back then, now there's online psychologists you can go meet with frequently. That didn't exist back in 2010. Yeah, so there would have been options if I would have made the effort. Living where I live, I would have had to drive. I lived an hour from the closest Walmart, probably easily 2 to 3 hours to the closest psychologist. So that also was not realistic.
Sure.
But like I said, dumb decisions I made. I absolutely enjoyed my time. I hope my kid does not make the same decisions. Absolutely. But it 100% shaped me to the person I am. On the plane ride over, I was a early 20s, mouthy, cocky son of a gun that probably had a chip on his shoulder for take your pick of reasons. I definitely came home humbled. I came home grounded for sure. It grew me up fast, big time, mentally, physically, emotionally. But it also changed my mindset to get me to where I am today. I kind of briefly jumped over some of these steps as to how I got here today. When I came back home, I went back to work for dad at the seed company and did that for a long time. Dad and I ended up getting into cattle in 2011 or 12, I think 2012, we finally got cattle on the ground. So then I kind of bought dad out of that and ran the cattle myself. And the cattle operation is ultimately what led me to Legacy Farmer. That's how we met. And so I did that for a little while and ultimately decided that I needed to go carve my own path. And I left the family seed company. It was a hard decision. I loved my dad. I just got to the point where to preserve relationships, I needed to step away. And so my wife and I made the hard decision to step away, put all my chips into, well, I guess there was a brief little 1-year window where I tried to be an independent seed salesman for Beck's Hybrids. Loved the company. Absolutely hated being a seed salesman. Hated it. Loved the company though. I still try to model. I can never say enough good things about the culture and the company that are Beck's, but seed selling it just wasn't for me. I hated it. I can sell you about anything once you get in the doors, but that seed wasn't my passion. Guns and ammo, accessories, that kind of stuff was my passion. So, like I said, did that for about a year. And then, I want to say it was about 2020. This is 26. It's probably about 2021 or 2 that I decided to make that jump and carve my own future. Here I am.
Yeah, you bet. Here you are. So tell me about Sharpshooting Supply. Tell me about the gun store. What's that all entail? And then even kind of where you're at today. We've talked about a lot. We were kind of bringing you up to full speed here. Where are you at today? You mentioned helping other people put their pieces back together. And how do you feel like you can kind of even do that within the gun store as well?
Yeah. So gun store, I actually started it in 2009 as a hobby. Took out a $50,000 loan, and that got me, few long guns, few handguns, and some ammo. And I was terrified how I was going to pay back the bank. How am I going to do this? And I live in a town with a population of like 150 people. But being so rural, there's not a lot of gun store options. The closest gun store then was an hour. And it worked out pretty well. Really, really did okay. But then again, it was just kind of a weekend hobby. I put that on pause. I went overseas, came back and kind of really fired that back up to making it a legitimate business. Ended up hiring a full-time person while I still worked for dad. And that person ran it for me for about a year. And then it just kind of wasn't a good fit. So I hired another person and they ran it for me for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, 3 or 4 years, I suppose. And then kind of got to where that just didn't seem a good fit. And in the gun world, we're bound by so many federal rules. If my employee makes a mistake, that reflects back on me and I go to prison, get the fine, whatever for it. So I have to have a lot of trust, a lot of faith in that person that's behind the counter for me. So after 2 years, that person didn't work out. So I hired the teacher that I pulled out of the classroom, and he really helped me get it going to more of a mainstream business. I had regular customers coming back. I was pulling people from as far as probably 90 miles away. And then he was still with me when I made the transition to move my gun store from Healy, Kansas to Scott City, Kansas. And I'd paid for a study, probably 2015, and Healy would get on average of 500 cars per day on Highway 4 in front of the shop. That's literally just number of vehicles, and it's a state estimation, right? Take that for what it's worth. And at the location I'm at now, at that time, they were getting 15,000 cars per day. So it was a big move. And then I needed to move my business to a bigger town, but I struggled a lot with giving up that oversight. Because even when I worked, for dad, I was literally 15 seconds away from being at the gun shop if I needed to. So getting the right people in place and some systems in place and stuff like that really let me give up a little bit of my control. I am by no means a micromanager, but I am a bit of a micromanager on paperwork. It let me step back a little bit and still live in Healy while the gun shop was in Scott City. But then here, about a year and a half ago now, my family and I, my wife and son, we sold our house in Healy and moved over to Scott. And so now I'm all in the gun shop. I'm in here every day. I work in my office most of the time, and there's no reason for me to be behind the counter. That's why you hire good people. And yeah, that lets me work on. We got a YouTube channel. Yeah, finally got monetized on Facebook. See how long that lasts. But it let me work on content, marketing, advertising, stuff like that. But I didn't have to be behind the counter, truly dealing with every customer that walked through the door and breaking that mindset while I was trying to work on like a marketing campaign. Oh, sorry, I got to go sell a $9 box of ammo. I just lost my thought process. So having good people is an absolute lifesaver.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what's interesting talking about, talking to you. Yeah, are you currently still a farmer? No, but I think there's a lot of things that you're doing from the business side of things that farmers can take away as well. I mean, heck, we could probably even dive into a whole nother episode just with the shooting store, and everything you've been able to do and how you've been able to ramp it up and whatnot. But how has that allowed you to kind of step into this next season that you're in, or really focus on the current season that you're in? And then I guess what are you getting back from that yourself as you really kind of focus on the gun store? And I also think it's awesome that, you've got a gun store and it's your last name is Sharp. I don't know why I think that coincidence there is just almost meant to be. So just definitely plays in your favor there. But what's that been like for you as you kind of focus on the gun store more?
Yeah, so it's definitely been a radical transition for me getting out of ag, completely out of ag now. No cattle. I sold out my cattle in 21, sold off my feed yard that I owned, my wife and I owned. We were up to like 4,000 head of cattle on top of the gun store, on top of working for dad. So like sleep wasn't something that I was really in favor of. But so it was just really wild getting out of ag. Now I've still got friends that own feed yards, friends that still have their cattle operations. And they always chuckle, if you don't want to make any money and get kicked in the shins, come on out and we'll put you to work in the feed yard. But it's just crazy where, man, if it's, negative 10 degrees outside, I don't care. My office is heated. If it's 100 degrees outside, I got my AC worked really good. It was just really weird not dressing in layers, not preparing for, man, I sweat my butt off today or I'm going to freeze. But it was just really weird. But my business, due to my geography, is still very, very, very reliant upon those that are in ag. Yes, I would say probably 80% of my customers are either farmers or ranchers themselves. So if they're having good years, I'm going to have a good year. If they're having bad years, I'm going to have to work a heck of a lot harder to broaden my reach to have good year. So that was kind of wild. I kind of forgot to answer your question earlier. You asked, how do I still feel like I'm helping and giving back? We're through the gun store. We're very, very, very involved with our local law enforcement. Every day, all day, we offer a 3% discount to active and retired first responders, fire, police, EMS, dispatchers. Same way with military, active and retired. So we still, have that little way we give back, but we're big donors. We donate guns and ammo all the time to various organizations, whether that be a fundraiser for someone who got hurt and then they need to maybe update their house. We donate for that. I would say a lot of my personal give back or the shop give back is we put a lot of focus into that Western Child Advocacy Center. That's, our office serves, I believe it was 36 counties. That's huge. That's a huge stretch. And, it's all non-for-profit. So it relies on grants and donations. And so we hold fundraisers for that. And the guns always do very, very well at the fundraisers. So that's just kind of a way that we feel like we can help and give back. Local police departments, there's probably, I think, up to 6 local jurisdictions now, whether that be city police, county sheriff, whatever, that are shooting our guns. We don't 100% donate the ammo, obviously, but we give them a pretty healthy discount, try to make their budget stretch a little further. During COVID, when the world was crazy, couldn't get guns and ammo, I had just stockpiles of ammunition. And we were actually selling there for probably a 6-month window. If there was a bullet shot in Houston, entire city of Houston, Texas, it was one of my bullets. It's kind of wild from Southwest Kansas, same with Kansas City. It was just kind of crazy.
That's awesome.
But wouldn't have thought at that time, podunk 750 square foot gun store was supplying across the country. We have a website, and I ship to 42 or 43 of the still free states. We get customers that drive a couple hours just to our store. It helps that I'm the largest stocking gun store for probably about 2 hours. My next closest competition would be Hayes. and I'm good friends with the guys that own the gun stores in Hayes. We went to college together. We still shoot, like, we Snapchat about every other day. The demographics can be limiting, but that also increases my potential. With my prices, we'll never, how do we stand out? I'll never beat the big guys, the big box stores on pricing. Never. I don't have that buying power. But is what the big box stores don't offer is customer service. All we have to do is help the person find the right gun, or if we don't have what would be the right fit, I don't push the sale. The gal behind the counter that she's real big on, ironically, I would say probably 40% of my market is women, which is amazing. That's super cool. And that female may go to a large box store and they want to make the sale. They want to get the commission. I would rather make sure that they have what they feel comfortable with, what they know how to operate, versus just putting a big plastic piece of junk in their hand. So customer service is definitely how we stand apart. And that's kind of been one of the things that we get known for.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think there's a lot a guy can definitely take away from that. As you're talking here, just talking about the business side of things, and it's completely different than, those in production agriculture, but yet it's the same. It's still a business. It's still running a business and still kind of coming back to those basics. So I think that's great. I guess I want to be respectful of your time this afternoon. So I got two kind of questions, and I hope they're not hard, but two questions that are kind of burning in my mind. You made the comment of helping people put the pieces back together, and it sounds like, at some point, Hannah, your wife, really helped you put your pieces back together, and probably still in that right now. But, if somebody hears this, that, whether they served or whether they're just even going through their own challenges, whether their own hardship, their current hard season, they're trying to put their pieces back together. Do you have any sort of advice, any sort of something that worked for you besides finding, a Hannah in their own world? Do you have anything else that you kind of offer to that person right now?
Yeah. So definitely finding my wife was my number one saving grace. She is 100% my rock. And she's probably the only person that can say, hey, quit being a dumbass, and I'll listen to them versus like getting defensive real fast. But I think when I finally quit trying to bottle it all up and talking, that's what really, really helped me put my pieces back together. We all know the 22 a day, which, I think I haven't looked at this super recently, but I think the number's a little higher than that now. A lot of veteran suicide is due to them feeling they have no one to talk to, or no one to listen, and just talking with people, man. Like, even take that to business. Business is best ran with relationships. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have the relationships built, by morals, values, and communication. But if I didn't have those relationships with larger suppliers, importers, stuff like that, because I'm not an importer, I can't bring in stuff directly from out of the country, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And just building the relationships and just talking to people. Hey, if someone's having a bad day, go strike up conversation. My wife always gives me a hard time. I'll chat with a brick wall if they'll listen. It's just, my grandfather was the same way. He just passed away. And at his funeral, I mentioned it, Dad mentioned it, Grandpa didn't know a stranger. He just generally wants to know how people are doing. And we get caught up in that world today where, if the communication isn't happening through here, through a cell phone, that face-to-face or that personal connection is gone. And so I just like to get to know people, know their story. Hey, how's your day going? Just as simple as that. That's what's really helped me.
I think you said it best. I think that's very helpful, even if somebody's not going through something hard. How hard is it to just sit here and talk to somebody and strike up that conversation, that relationship with others? So that's great. I guess kind of last question here is, and as I was thinking about this, I don't know if it's the best question, but it's something that comes to mind for me, is for me, being maybe a civilian, maybe somebody that didn't serve, not an EMT, not on the fire department, don't necessarily have that community service side of things. Is there anything that, like, for you, maybe not necessarily being in the service, but you did serve to some extent, right? You did sacrifice. Is there anything that you wish civilians knew or understood better? I mentioned that literally at the beginning of this episode that, hey, Memorial Day, start of summer, start of grilling season, start of, the boys are looking forward to the pool being open finally. All those things, all those freedoms that we have, truthfully, because of people like you that were willing to sacrifice. And that's what I'm very thankful for, and I can never say that enough. So, thank you first off for your service and your sacrifice. But is there anything that you wish that others knew or understood a little bit better?
One of the things that absolutely drives me nuts is it's like complaining. Man, Like, I rarely complained because, hey, no one shot at me today. It's a pretty good day. You know, I carry a gun every day at work. That's more so for a show of force than it is for actually self defending my own life. Yeah, no one shot at me today. It's a good day. There's no reason to complain. Someone will complain because, I don't know, the drive through line was too long or internet was slow, couldn't stream a Netflix or something. Like, the complaining drives me nuts. And the saying we always used, a civilian emergency is not urgent. What a civilian may think is absolutely the world's worst thing that's ever happening, probably not the worst thing that's ever happened. So, like, before you want to complain about your day or for God's sakes, throw it on social media that you're having the worst day of your life, just take a step back and think, you got it pretty good. Overseas, one of the most humbling things for me overseas was I watched an entire population literally fight to the death to just see the next sunrise. We made the mistake very early and we didn't do it again. But we would go and throw out some candy bars. Just stupid. We had candy bars. We weren't big on sweets. We'd throw the candy bars to the kids. We watched a couple of kids literally kill each other for the candy bars. So it's just, human life has such little value that something we take for granted over here. We don't literally have to go worry about this building blowing up for like 99.999% of us, right? We don't have to worry about the building blowing up when we're going and getting our groceries. It's just an eye opener. If the civilian, like I said, I am a civilian. If a majority of the population that didn't serve would just think about today's not the worst day of your life. The fact you got a speeding ticket or something, it's not the worst thing that's going to happen to you. It's not the worst thing that's happened to anybody, I promise. So just being grateful, That's the biggest thing is I'm grateful for every sunrise. In fact, that's that's something I say in the shower every morning. Thank you, Lord, for giving me another sunrise. So let me use it to do your good.
That's great. That's great. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. Okay. And since you brought this up, I want to touch on this one last thing real quick, if you don't mind. Since you mentioned early on going overseas, seeing everything that you did, probably lost your faith to some extent. And now you just mentioned it here right at the end of this. Now we've gotten to the point where we are thanking God for every sunrise. Do you mind speaking just a couple minutes as to what that was like getting back to your faith to some extent? I mean, we can all grow in our faith more than what we currently are, but like, what was that process like getting back to your faith? Where are you at now? And what's kind of your perspective within that?
No, 100%. I definitely should have touched on it because it is very much a foundation of my life today. Yeah, I did fall out of my faith, and obviously that was all my own doing. It wasn't God. That was my own doing. Part of it was the church that I was at also. Before I met my wife, I had a girlfriend, and I had some ladies in the church on my front porch telling me how I was going to hell for living with an unmarried woman. That doesn't exactly make you want to kind of come back to the only church in that small town. So that was another one that was just really pushed me away. But I've said this a lot, and I hope she comes back and watches this. But Hannah brought me back to my faith for sure. She was always very, very devout. And another thing that probably really helped was when Hannah and I got together and I started going back to church with her. Healy had just gotten a new preacher, and he was actually a former Ranger. He was a Ranger during some pretty rough times in U.S. history. So I felt like I could relate to him, or he could relate to me, I guess, so to speak. And that really helped me realize that, hey, if he could go overseas, and he didn't necessarily do what I did, but if he still served, he was in those war-torn conflicts, then maybe I need to be a little more forgiving and eye-opening. And that definitely helped. And then I did protest quite a bit during the first few months when Hannah had me going. We weren't even married yet, but I was going to church with her. And now we don't like to miss church. So it definitely gave me a sense of peace. God didn't push me away. He was there waiting for me. And I think I took, what was it? Probably a 5 to 8 year hiatus. But he was there waiting for me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing about that. I think glad that you were able to kind of find your way back. I'm glad that God works in mysterious ways, right? Was able to work through Hannah to get you back to your faith, right? And so, once again, I guess, Tyler, I appreciate you sharing everything. And, our conversations over the years, you've never been one to hold back. Maybe to some extent, but to be willing to share everything that you're going through, everything, all the stories in the past. I've heard a couple of these that you talked about today. I've heard them in the past, but a couple that were new, right? And so I guess, man, I really appreciate your one, your service, your sacrifice, all that you're doing today, even to kind of help in your community. That's great. And to everybody else that's out there, all the other, veterans that have served and those that haven't served, even in the private sector, even in the local side of things, I appreciate you. Helps keep this a great country, helps keep it to where we don't have anything to complain about, right? Nothing major anyways. And so I guess any kind of closing thoughts or comments as we get to kind of rounding this out today.
No, I appreciate you having me on the podcast. I listen to your podcast all the time. I love it. If there's anyone out there that's struggling or having a rough time, look me up. I'm not hard to find. I'm happy to listen.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess where can people find you if they want to shop around for your gun store?
Pretty simple. We're at sharpsshootingsupply.com. There's those two S's back to back. Probably should have chose a shorter name, but that's the one I was given. So that's where we're at. Facebook, YouTube. I can even have Instagram now. I'm getting pretty fancy. My niece told me I was old because I didn't do the Instagram thing. So we're working on that. But yeah, I'm out there. And if someone needs just even an ear to listen, I'm here.
That's great. That's great. Well, I guess with that, I appreciate you coming on here today. And I thank you listeners for listening in on this episode. Once again, reach out if you want to learn more about Tyler, if you want to just talk to him, if there's something that he mentioned that you want to learn more about, by all means. But that's all we have for this week's episode, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.